This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. In 2015, Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy made headlines for his Second Chance Society. The reform measures included decreasing penalties for simple drug offenses and improving the process behind parole hearings and pardons to help nonviolent offenders get back to living on the outside. The reforms easily won bipartisan support. Not so this year when Second Chance 2.0 came out before lawmakers. This time the proposals appeared too controversial. Today, Where We Live, we look back on the legislation that the governor and the Democratic-led General Assembly couldn't agree on. Meanwhile, it's not just state lawmakers who are thinking about making it easier for ex-offenders to transition back into society. We'll check in with cities like New Haven and Bridgeport to learn about reentry initiatives there. And later in the hour, we'll hear why some business owners have been open to hiring people with prison records. You can join the conversation, 860-275-7266. Comment on our website, wnpr.org/where we live. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. First off, we want to find out more about why Second Chance 2.0 failed, and could it come up again in the upcoming legislative session? In studio to help us answer that question is Jacqueline Rabe Thomas, a reporter for Connecticut Mirror at ctmirror.org. Always good to have you with us, Jackie.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that Second Chance 2.0 wasn't as successful as that first package of reforms. What was Governor Malloy specifically asking for in that legislation?
So there were really two components. The first component was bail reform, so essentially eliminating bail for most minor offenses. So someone sitting in jail wouldn't be sitting there just because they couldn't afford, the $200 to get out for low-level offenses. After that failed to pass this last legislative session or earlier this year, the governor's office began sending out daily emails to reporters of how many people were sitting in jail for low-level offenses simply because they couldn't afford to post bail. It was about 350 on any given day. So that was the first component. And then the second component was raising the age of who is exactly considered a juvenile and handled in the juvenile justice system. And currently, those who commit offenses under age 18 are handled in the juvenile justice system. But for more serious offenses, they are automatically transferred to the adult court. So homicides are automatically routed to the adult system, as well as courts have the judges have the authority to consider whether or not a case should be sent over to the adult system. And so the governor really was proposing expanding that reach for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And behind that point is that 3/4 of those who are arrested are charged with the most serious offense that they're charged with are misdemeanors. So by and large, those who are ending up in the adult criminal justice system at age 18, 19, and 20 are for misdemeanors. So they're not those large, we're not talking about homicides here. Those would still be in the adult system under this raise the age proposal, as well as there was this initiative to make sure that they are treated appropriately once they are in the juvenile justice system, so that, there's sort of this idea behind rehabilitation versus punishment, and really shield them from having, for lack of a better metaphor, a scarlet letter for the rest of their life, or that arrest record will live on forever. Because no matter what the outcome of that arrest is, and whether or not they're adjudicated, that online arrest lives on forever.
And that idea to raise the age of adult criminal responsibility, that really came from what Europe is doing, right?
Right. So Germany, in post-World War II era, they raised the age so that they captured more of these adolescents into their system. And they actually include homicide offenses in their juvenile justice system. So something like 90% of those who are charged with murder, various more serious offenses are still handled in their juvenile justice system. So that's not what was being proposed here in any way. The Netherlands also more recently has shifted to a larger age. And then also in other states and throughout the U.S. have also been pushing for this. Illinois and Vermont have been considering this. That neither of those states has it passed yet, but it is something that is, the discussion is starting to be raised.
I wanted to point out we did reach out to Governor Malloy's administration to come on to talk about, again, Second Chance, which was a very big part of this last legislative session. Again, two of those measures or that legislation actually failed, and we wanted to find out, what are the chances of it being brought up again in the upcoming session. I'm talking with Jacqueline Rabe Thomas, a reporter for the Connecticut Mirror at ctmirror.org. And when we talk about how the legislation failed, we have a clip now when Governor Malloy was speaking to reporters just in June, and he actually blamed the failure of the Second Chance 2.0 legislation on the timing of the bill.
If this had not been an election year, we would have passed this legislation. I don't agree that that's a good excuse, but I understand it.
So he's saying all the seats are up for re-election this November, and because of that, some lawmakers didn't want to look like they were being soft on crime if they were to support 2.0?
I think that's the perfect way to put it. You have a state Senate that very well could shift over to the Republicans being in the majority. You have a Democratic governor and a Democratic House and Democratic Senate who couldn't get together and pass this and shepherd it through. So that makes you wonder how much power are the Republicans holding in this debate. And it's important to mention that criminal justice reform, by and large, has been sort of a bipartisan issue, depending on tweaks a little bit along the way. But there has been Republican support for some reforms. That said, no one wants to be seen as soft on crime. And I think this idea of capturing more people into the juvenile justice system, it might be perceived that way. So you saw during as the days wind down in the legislative session that Republicans really were trying to be negotiating with the Republicans to try to get this across the finish line.
So we know that you said it wasn't as palatable to have to think about 18 to 20-year-olds in the juvenile justice system. Weren't there also concerns during the session about, okay, well, if we were to do this for low-level crime, the dynamic and the logistics of how you would deal with these cases in the court system, if people needed to be jailed, where would you be putting them? Do you want to have these 18 to 21-year-olds in, with the older adult population? Where's the facility for them if they're going to be considered juveniles?
Right. So there's a difference between, theoretically doing something and how practical it is. So just something as simple as, for domestic violence, for example, having intimate partner violence now included in the juvenile justice system. Do you want a group therapy where the people range from age 14 to 20 in one group therapy? I don't think anyone was suggesting that, but there are sort of these practical things that you have to think about how that plays out, as well as, there's immediate protections or near immediate protections for people who are victims of intimate family violence and domestic violence, of getting a temporary restraining order there before a judge, within 24 hours versus in the juvenile justice system, it could take weeks before you get before a system. And just trying to figure out how just the practical nature of moving these offenses over to the juvenile justice system is something that is trying to be worked out. And there is support among, I heard last week that there was some support among getting this done. It's just they want to make sure all the protections that have been put in place on the adult side transfer over to the juvenile side.
We heard a lot about compromise this past legislative session. So if, allowing 18 to 20-year-olds to be considered juvenile offenders, if that wasn't palatable, again, that was dropped. But what happened with the bail reform initiative?
The bail reform initiative, so raise the age was dropped as the legislature was preparing to come back into session. And the goal was to get enough support for the bail reform. The votes just weren't there. There was a caucus all day for both of them, and then they came out and said, it's just not happening this year. Not much explanation given of sort of what happened. That doesn't mean it's not going to be proposed next year. I've seen several bills year after year come up, and third year's the charm or fourth year's the charm. So I think just because something didn't happen in the first year doesn't mean it's over. Next year's not an election year, so there is still a chance for it.
But there were real consequences to Second Chance 2.0 not being passed. That includes another 15 to 20 million that had to be cut from that budget. We know that House Minority Leader Themis Claridis was one of the unhappy ones. Here she is in June talking about the relationship between, again, Second Chance 2.0 and fiscal responsibility.
I've heard some of the governor's spokespeople in the past few weeks mention, well, it would leave a $15 million hole if we don't pass this. Well, first of all, shame on you for building it in when you have no idea if this is going to pass. But more importantly, all of a sudden you've become fiscally responsible with public safety. That's where you decide you want to save money when you're cutting social services, when you're cutting nonprofits, when you're cutting disabled population money. And now you want to put people on the street that should be in jail?
So, a lot of, anger that because they didn't want to feel comfortable passing this, that they now had to move those cuts onto other services. But that would have happened anyway.
Right. So the $15 million that you mentioned is from the estimated savings from closing a jail. So by not having so many people incarcerated because of low-level offenses, it was estimated that maybe that would reduce the inmate population. The Office of Fiscal Analysis, the legislature's nonpartisan fiscal arm, they reported that alone reform would not necessarily close a jail, but it was a piece of the puzzle to getting the incarceration rate down. So it was a piece, but it wasn't the only piece. It is important to mention, too, to Themis's later point of, you're cutting everywhere else. Those cuts do include many, many reentry services. The Department of Correction just 2 weeks ago, announced that they're cutting $8.5 million from non-residential programs for reentry for people who are leaving. On the judicial side, to divert people from even ending up incarcerated, they had to cut $77 million. Most of that fell on personnel, so court services, but $24 million of that fell on services that they contract with. So things like, 10 private providers who provide detox and substance abuse treatment in the community were cut by 123 beds. That's 40% of the beds that the judicial branch provides to hopefully divert them from ever ending up in prison in the first place and get them out of the criminal justice system. So if you're talking about reform, you can't just see it in isolation. You have to also see the cuts elsewhere in the system.
Do you think, we keep hearing that the deficit's only going to get worse in the coming couple of fiscal years? I mean, because of the cuts that had to be made with this legislation not passing this session, will that be enough of a push to possibly see that reform happen next session?
There's definitely some troubled fiscal waters ahead. When the budget was passed, the Office of Fiscal Analysis estimated a $1.3 billion deficit for the fiscal year that begins July 1, 2017. Reducing the inmate population definitely saves money. There's no doubt about it. So there is sort of this money generator that comes from reducing the inmate population. So it's good for society. It's good for, you can argue it's good for society. You can argue it'll also save money. So I think that will help push it through.
I've been speaking to Jacqueline Rabe Thomas, again, a reporter for the Connecticut Mirror at ctmirror.org. Thanks a lot for your analysis.
Absolutely.
Today, Where We Live, we're talking about criminal justice reform in Connecticut. Coming up, we're going to find out more about reentry initiatives in our cities. And we're going to hear from someone who knows a little bit about what it's like to be in prison. That's Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim. That's after the break. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Cities often bear the burden of helping ex-inmates restart their lives. Some leaders in those communities have complained that they're the ones who need more resources from the state to help ex-offenders reintegrate, many who show up in cities just hours after leaving prison. That's something former New Haven Mayor John DeStefano often talked about during his long tenure, which included prisoner reentry initiatives. Today, Where We Live, we look at what the city of New Haven is doing today to help ex-cons. Recently, under Mayor Tony Harp, the Elm City hired a project coordinator to run a reentry program with a Second Chance grant. Joining us now from the studios of Yale University is Earl Bloodworth. Earl, thanks for coming on Where We Live.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your job. Why did you take it?
Well, I am a resident of the city of New Haven, and I was very aware of the issues that this particular population has. Just last year, I was working with the African American Affairs Commission in Hartford at the General Assembly, and reentry as well as racial profiling and the school-to-prison pipeline were some issues that were being addressed and reviewed with the African American Affairs Commission, and as well as a couple of other commissions that were in Hartford at the time. So I got keenly aware and attuned to the issue and became very passionate about it. And when the opportunity presented itself for this position, I did apply, and was blessed to receive the opportunity to work with this population in the city of New Haven and its progressive reform for this population coming back to the community so we can make them successful. So, I mean, I believe everybody deserves a second chance.
And Earl, I read that you're actually a native of New Haven. So, coming up through the school system, people that you know from, living in New Haven. I mean, what are you seeing in neighborhoods? Are people, when they're coming home, getting enough of those services to help them restart their lives?
I mean, there are a number of services, but there's still a lot of work. And just as you were talking about in your previous interview and analysis, it's with the current budget crisis in the state of Connecticut, the services are limited, and we're definitely having to be more efficient in how you address the issues for this particular population. I mean, when you think about this particular population and these men and women coming out of prison, there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. So it's not just as simple as, let's get them some housing, let's get them a job and employment. Many of these people have traumatic issues that have not been dealt with. So you're also talking about therapy, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, so that you can help them with or build in better coping skills and less antisocial tendencies. So it's a large network that's required to assist this particular population. And the city of New Haven has been working with multiple agencies, in particular with this grant. It was a collaborative grant between the city of New Haven and three city resource agencies, Easterfield Goodwill, Project More, and the Community Action Agency of New Haven. So for lack of a better term, it does take a village to assist in this particular population. And just overall, we can only do this together, not working in silos. So,
Earl, I had mentioned in the intro, we often heard former New Haven Mayor John DeStefano talking about, the resources needed to help ex-prisoners when they come back into communities. I mean, we hear so often from the state that, the prison population is dropping. So how many are we talking about that come to New Haven that need services that you're mentioning, ex-prisoners?
Well, the numbers state over the last couple of years and reviewing and gearing up to go for this particular second chance grant, that approximately in the city of New Haven, 100 inmates come out per month. So that's about 1,200 people per year that are coming to the city of New Haven. And most of them are New Haven residents, and you do have some instances where they're not New Haven residents, but as your guest previously said, people, whether it's New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford, or what, people just kind of get dropped off. And then without the proper support and resources, more than likely, they're going to end up back in jail. So the numbers may be dropping of people incarcerated, but you still have a constant flow in and out. So it's kind of, it has sort of an equilibrium.
Mm-hmm. I'm speaking with Earl Bloodworth. He's project manager of the Warren Kimbrough Reentry Project in New Haven. And again, we're talking today about helping ex-prisoners get back into society. On the phone with us now is Mayor of the City of Bridgeport, Joe Ganim. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Lucy. It's a pleasure to listen to Earl, too.
So I want to
congratulate him and the work that he's doing, and the city of New Haven is doing under Mayor Harp.
So you have unveiled a reentry initiative this past June. Most of our Connecticut residents know that you're also an ex-offender. So is this something that compelled you to want to help other people who have prison records in your city?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd like to think that regardless of my past, that I'd want to be taking the lead on this as mayor regardless. But I will tell you, I think everyone would agree, personal life experiences, good, bad, whatever they are, certainly shape us and help us to understand better. If you've been in someone else's, let's just say, shoes or position, you certainly can have firsthand knowledge, as I do, how difficult it can be for anyone coming in and trying to do, let's just call it reentry or reestablishing himself back in their community or possibly in a new community. And just to give you a little personal anecdote, I mean, I came back to the Bridgeport area with all the benefits that most people don't have. Large family, less in the area of needs, financial needs than others, education, job experience, contacts, and yet found resistance, reluctance, and hurdles to overcome because of the stigmas attached to, unfortunately, anyone who has gone away for whatever reasons, paid their debt to society, come back and tried to reestablish themselves. So I get it. I probably, unfortunately, because of my experiences, or fortunately maybe, I get it a little more personally than others. And we in Bridgeport, you're right, we did kick off in June, but we're announcing, I think, the real implementation of the Bridgeport Mayor's Initiative on Reentry Affairs this Monday, which I hope will be as comprehensive and holistic as a program that any city can provide.
So, Mayor Ganim, tell us specifically what are you doing in Bridgeport that's going to help ex-prisoners?
Well, I got to tell you, I think New Haven's doing a great job, and we've listened and learned a great deal from what they're doing and other cities are doing, and we will, in so many ways, try and address a lot of the things that Earl mentioned that are some of the challenges. I mean, my first focus was employment. How do we help people get a job? I mean, the best thing you can do for anyone, if they've got most of their other challenges at least addressed, is to give them a job, because then they're focused, they're able to earn an income, they're able to pay for their housing, they're able to pay for transportation, support their families if the case may be. But you dig down a little deeper with people that around me a lot smarter than me, realize, hey, Joe, wait a minute, a job is critically important, no question. But so many have mental health issues. I don't mean that they're crazy, just that have mental health challenges, readjusting. They need educational assistance, housing services. So I think I know what we're doing now is going to look at a comprehensive, we call it holistic approach to the entire person who's challenged with reentry coming to Bridgeport. Our numbers are similar to what New Haven has, 1,000, 1,100 individuals on an annual basis. We have about, you could almost say, close to 20% of our population could be identified technically as ex-offenders. That's probably not unusual for larger cities, probably across the country or certainly in Connecticut. So we want to do all that. We've engaged employers. We've got employers to sign up and say, yes, I'll give an ex-offender an opportunity through one of the programs that the city is spearheading and coordinating in conjunction with a number of the already existing services provided through nonprofits, and try and really reach out to and give a helping hand to a large segment, as you can see by the percentages, of a population that wants to reintegrate and be a positive part, certainly, of the city of Bridgeport, and I'm sure of communities across the country.
So specifically in June, you were going to allocate city money to start up a fund so that it would encourage employers to take a chance on these ex-offenders, and if they work out for a period of 1 to 3 months, would they be paying their salaries?
Yeah, since then, there's been the announcement through one of our partners, the Workplace, the receipt of some federal grant money, and there's more on the way. So that amount of money, which was more symbolic, I don't mean to minimize its importance, but yes, the role was, look, and the part of the program still is, it's called what many would refer to either identical to or part of the Step Up program, where you say, look, give Joe Schmo an opportunity. We've done our assessment, and this individual has our support through our program. Give them a job opportunity for a number of weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And through our program, that salary will be paid. They will not be an employee. They'll almost be a loaned exec or a loaned employee. So the liability or the risk, if you will, on the employer, who may be reluctant entering into kind of a new area, will be minimized or eliminated. And what we found, and what other communities have found, is once that happens, they end up with a valued employee. They say, wait a minute, we want to keep this person. And then from there, they transition on to become a full employee of that employer. And we've got some 15 and growing list of businesses in the Bridgeport area that have literally signed up to participate in this. And each day that I talk to someone else and I expose them to what we're doing, you hear more employers saying, I'll do that. Not only might it be good for my business, but you know what? I'm giving something back and helping someone out.
And what kind of jobs are we talking about?
You're talking about any type of jobs. We've had employers that do everything from small manufacturing of cases for musical instruments to service providers of just about A to Z. There are some industries that are probably more reluctant, justifiably so, at least on the surface. Sometimes financial institutions or those that have a heightened level of what require background checks that on its face would cause a red flag for an individual who has a past. So we're trying to work through that end of it, but our more the greater percentages of the employers are not those type that are just your regular businesses that are throughout the city. I don't have the list in front of me, but I could probably read it off to you. Some you might know just because of their widespread larger businesses, and some small that you wouldn't know.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're looking at Connecticut's focus on criminal justice reform. Oftentimes the state's getting a lot of attention on giving ex-offenders a second chance, but it's local communities, too, that have initiatives such as the City of New Haven and the City of Bridgeport. On the phone with me is Mayor of Bridgeport, Joe Ganim, also Earl Bloodworth, the project manager of the Warren Kimbrough Reentry Project in New Haven. I wanted to turn back to you, Earl. You had made a point earlier that it's not always about hooking up an ex-offender to a job and housing, but to get them services so that they can really successfully integrate, even counseling. Can you talk specifically about that?
Well, yeah. Specifically on the side of New Haven, New Haven actually has two reentry services. I'm project manager of the WKRP, or Warren Kimbrough Reentry Project, and we also have the Fresh Start initiative working here in New Haven as well. So with the WKRP, what we are focused on are ages between 18 and 24 specifically, and then also from 24 to about 44 who might have chronic illness or disease. But specifically with the age group of 18 to 24, we are focusing on a model from Dr. Latessa out of Ohio, and who also has ties here at UNH, with what's called the R&R model, or risk, needs, and responsivity. And so what that is looking at about 8 categories that might cause a person to recidivate, and basically focus on the moderate and high risk people in the population that might recidivate of ex-offenders. And so in looking at that, it was found that when you focus on these criminogenic needs or risk, I should say, actually, for this particular population, for the moderate and high, you have a tendency to reduce their risk of recidivism. But what was also found in the studies was that if there is a focus on the low risk, which is kind of what has been going on for years in our country, is a one-size-fits-all. If you focus on the low risk and you try to implement some of these therapies and different resources towards that particular population, which really doesn't need it, you actually then cause them to recidivate, because they are able to manage, like Galen was saying, once you come out of incarceration, and if you've been in there for a very long time, it's a completely different world where it's very, very, very structured, and you are out in society where you don't necessarily have that similar structure. And then you also have those unmet needs of mental health, or possibly trauma from your childhood or in prison. And PTSD, and it's untreated. So if you don't focus on those underlying issues, giving somebody a job who can't necessarily cope and manage that responsibility or work within that particular structure, then you're not necessarily helping them. You're actually setting them up for failure.
Earl, you mentioned trauma in families. I've seen statistics or research done where so often the young people that we have in our prison systems, they're coming from families where they've had a relative in prison. And so it's just this cycle that keeps repeating.
Yeah, it's definitely a cycle that keeps repeating. And not only that, many of the individuals, men and women that are coming out, not only are you dealing with trauma, but you're also dealing with deficiency in education, around literacy and numeracy as well. So you're not addressing these needs while they're in. And one of the things with the WKRP is that we're trying to start the intake process for particular people that would meet the requirements for this program at least 9 to 12 months while they are in prison before they get out. Because starting after they get out or right before they get out, 60 days or so, it's not very helpful. It hasn't proven to be effective.
And Mayor Ganim, I wanted to turn back to you. We were talking earlier about when you got out, obviously you had resources that other ex-offenders may not have. But at the same time, you're probably used to people who, are judging you because of your past. And so, what did you find worked for you that you could get past that and know that, it was time for you to restart your life and you, again, were lucky to find back to a political career?
I think you just got to, for everyone, you got to do your own. If there's a program like we're offering in Bridgeport, or there's a program like New Haven's offering, take advantage of it. This is a great contribution of smart, committed people, agencies, employers willing to create that opportunity. But you also have to push ahead and really focus on where your strengths are, what challenges you really can or are ready to meet when you come out with or without help, and then tackle them one by one. Mine were maybe smaller than others. I had a family, I was a lawyer by trade. I didn't have my license when I came back, but I had an office to go to. I had a place to work. I had a place to live. I had a car to drive. I certainly had huge challenges, many of which I'll spare you on. But but there's the whole readjustment, I think, that was just mentioned too. Especially if you're long term, as Earl mentioned. If you're away a long time, the world changes. Technology changes. Friends change. People die. People are born. You could find yourself coming into a whole different world than the one you left, even if everything else is perfect. So what we're doing, it's really about helping people make better choices in so many ways to help reduce, I love the term, it sounds like one of those big words, recidivism. In other words, making the same mistakes or ending up back in the same place because they didn't either understand the challenges and were able to meet them, or did understand them but just didn't have the resources or strength or support to do it. Because nobody by choice, certainly not by good choice, want to end up on the back end of the criminal justice system, and don't do it for obviously for all the wrong reasons. But usually when they come out, if you give them the opportunity, many people have gotten hit over the head hard enough to realize that this is not what they want to do again. So sure, the simple time. The time warp challenges for me, I'll give you kind of a small anecdote, and I don't mean to make light of it. But I came out and was heading back on a bus to Connecticut, and I was sitting on the bus, and someone sat behind me and kept talking. I thought they were talking to me. I kept turning my head around listening, and I realized after about the third time I turned my head around, they had a Bluetooth in the rear and were talking to their phone. Well, I didn't know what a Bluetooth was. I hadn't seen a this was something that kind of developed while I was away. We didn't have access to electronics. Now, that's a small little thing, but if you put that out into the real world and you identify 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 things and the way life has changed, and those are the easy things to adapt to. The harder things are maybe how skills in the workplace have changed, or forget about the reluctance to hire someone because of a criminal conviction on their history. Just the way things have changed, or being away from your skill if you have a skill, or not having your license for your profession if you have a profession. So the whole host of things that come up. We want to have a one-stop in Bridgeport. We have a lot of great organizations out there. We want to make it, as I said, a partnership with them, but one stop where people can come in and find this to be a place where they can get back on their feet and be, I don't use the cliche, but a contributing member of the community after they've gotten services, after they've been the beneficiary of some services, to make that contribution back. So I'm excited. I'm also excited on a national and state level. But this has really gotten to the level where people have turned from the overriding feeling that our criminal justice system was bent on deterrence, which it needs to be a part of. But there's an element that seemed to have gotten lost for decades, and that was on rehabilitation. And that element seems, at least through this president, I think through the leadership we have in the state of Connecticut, I hope on local levels like we're seeing in New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford, being led to turn the corner of where the real focus needs to be on criminal justice in America.
And Mayor Ganim, I get your point about how the world moves on when people are serving time. But, so much of when someone gets out, so much of our everyday is just human interaction and how people judge us or have perceptions. And so do you think that the attention in Connecticut with second chance and giving people another chance, is that message getting through? Because we are hearing from some people in the business community who, they want to be able to have the full option to who they hire. And so there is still a little bit of a tension there, isn't there?
Oh, look, I don't think it's a non-issue. But I think the fact that there's a discussion, that we're having this talk on the radio, that the president's announced second chance, that the governor's announced second chance, that we're putting resources and our best people behind this effort, goes a long way to start changing those that are more reluctant. And I do think that there needs to be, this is not something where you hide the fact that someone has whatever history or past that they have. I don't think that's ever the case, certainly for anyone who's engaging in a relationship, a business relationship, or a partnership, or an employment relationship. But I do think the opportunity, I'm for ban the box, which means that, that resume or that application will get reviewed by everyone else, yet there'll be full disclosure, either at the point or prior to the point of hiring, where someone can say, okay, I get that, but we're not going to throw your resume or your application in a separate pile, which is what happens, whether people want to admit it or not. So I think that's the balance, and that's kind of the road we're on. I think I'd like to think as a society in general, with this type of dialogue, hopefully, it's, in any small way that I can, having come back through the gauntlet of public exposure, of running for public office, of getting elected as mayor again to the state's largest city. Hopefully that sends a message. If I do, not just through second chance, but if we're able to see someone who's come back through after being through those challenges, people say, holy, yeah, I guess this is another example of how this can work in a positive way, and maybe that lends some credibility to someone else who's looking for a second chance.
I want to thank Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim for joining us. Thanks so much, Mayor.
Thank you.
Also, Earl Bloodworth, project manager of the Warren Kimbrough Reentry Project in New Haven. Thank you so much, Earl, for coming on and telling us a little bit about your project.
Not a problem. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me. In the city of New Haven.
Thank you, Earl. And we know that the public sector has initiatives to help people get out of prison. But as we've heard, is it too risky for the private sector to want to give ex-cons a second chance? When we come back from the break, we'll hear from one business owner who thinks it's a risk worth taking. This is Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up tomorrow, Connecticut is among the least religious states in the country, according to the Pew Research Center. But while the number of churchgoers might not be high, religion is a pillar of our state's history. Join us as we explore our Puritan past and find out how that past still influences our communities today. Where We Live's been talking about initiatives in Connecticut on a state and local level to end the policies that have fueled mass incarceration in the United States. Ban the Box, as it's known, is one measure municipalities around the country have debated. It would prevent job applications from having the question of whether an applicant has a criminal record. Ex-inmates say if they check that box, it usually means they have no chance of getting that job. In Connecticut, a new law will be taking effect in 2017 that would ban the box from an initial application. Only later, if an employer is set to offer a job to someone, would they be free to inquire about a criminal record. And obviously, that's not that limitation is not sitting well with all business owners. There is a local restaurant owner here in Hartford who's made a point to offer second chances at his establishments. He joins us by phone now. Jamie McDonald is a co-owner of Bear's Smokehouse Barbecue in Connecticut. Hi, Jamie. You're on Where We Live.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So we hear that you and your wife have been making a real effort at your businesses, not just in Hartford, but also, I believe, in Windsor, to hire ex-offenders. Where did that thought come from?
I think I know that definitely in our families or just our social networks, we all know somebody that has either dealt with or is currently dealing with some type of substance abuse problem. And keeping that in mind, even from my own childhood, I know people make bad choices sometimes, and if they're truly trying to get back on the right track and better their lives, sometimes that's all they need is somebody to reach out a hand and help them up. And without that, there's just a continuous cycle of just negativity in their lives.
So your successes your businesses have seen real success in the last few years. Tell us about the people you're hiring.
So we started off by hiring from Billings Forge, which is a local nonprofit kitchen in Hartford. And from there, we started establishing partnerships with different organizations like Open Hearth, which is right down the street from our Hartford location. And
Jamie, are you there? Looks like your cell phone. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Jamie. Your cell phone cut out. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we partnered up with organizations like Open Hearth in Hartford, and they kind of know what we're looking for, so they send us applications. And there's not much we won't hire for, but if somebody comes in for the interview, they have a good attitude. They are, like I said, they're trying to get on a right path and better their lives. We'll give anybody a chance, pretty much. And it could be as a dishwasher, it could be as a one of our line servers, our cooks. Get their foot in the door. Show us that you're gonna be dependable, that you're gonna have a good attitude, and really with us, the sky's the limit. There are no limitations as to what somebody could do based on their past.
And so, what have you been seeing in terms of the ex-offenders that you've been able to hire? Have they all been success stories?
Not all, and that's part of the risk or just the risk of these types of hiring practices. Is we either get people that they come in and they're immediately back out, or back in jail or prison. We have a kind of another segment that really does well for a while, and we've had a couple guys that were just absolutely fantastic employees, great people, but they make a bad decision and they're back in. But we have the third segment, that is those that are doing well, are great employees that we continue to give them more responsibility. They transfer out of the halfway houses. They're now living on their own and are, productive members of society. And that's really the kind of end goal for us, is helping these folks get on their feet and letting them know that there are people out there that'll help them despite past indiscretions, I'll say.
I'm speaking with Jamie McDonald, co-owner of Bear's Smokehouse Barbecue in Connecticut. Jamie, earlier in the hour we heard from some city officials who have reentry initiatives, and one of them had made the comment that, it's not always about getting someone that job or making sure they have a roof over their head, but, when you go to prison, trauma does happen, and it takes time to get over that experience and to transition back into society. What have you been hearing from some of your staff who've, spent some time on the inside, and what kind of services they need besides that foot in the door?
To your point, there's prison's not a nice place. It's fairly traumatic for anyone, and depending on the length that they were incarcerated for, the gentleman that you just had on was talking about, that there's stuff that they haven't seen before, that just even from that aspect, or there's mental health issues that have to be dealt with. But for us, it's about giving them a steady place to come to work, a good environment, and a lot of the guys will, they want to work. They'd work every day of the week if I let them, because it keeps them busy. It helps them through that, like you said, that transition and getting reacclimated to normal life.
What would you say to other business owners who, might be on the fence about wanting to give someone a chance, even if they have a criminal record?
The way I look at it is, if it was me, I'd want the same thing. There are risks, but they're minimal. We've never had any issues at any of our restaurants with employees and, any bad behavior. It's more so you a little bit higher turnover, and not everybody works out, but those that do are the most appreciative, loyal, hardworking employees that we have.
We're getting a tweet from a listener who says, Bears has great food, employees, while doing the right thing for community members. Is that the sentiment that you're hearing across the state?
Yeah, no, and it's, one of both my wife and I's kind of core philosophies is that all communities should benefit from having a business there just as much as the business benefits from being in the community. And so from day one, we've tried to always give back as much as we can. And it's part of, I'm blessed enough to have some success with the restaurants, and you want to share that and help other people out. And, that's to us, that's the whole point of it.
Any criticism? I mean, if somebody finds out that, the person that's serving them has a criminal record, have you ever had that experience?
Not too much, but I have, and it's more so, we did a interview with Governor Malloy a couple months back, and there was some feedback. Why do you offer these people jobs when there's plenty of other people that haven't committed the crime that need jobs also? And my point to him is we don't give necessarily any preference to anybody, and I think that's the point of it. Is it's basically discrimination against people that have been in prison. So it's not about giving them any preference. It's allowing them to be on equal footing with the rest of the applicants.
And how many of your staff would you say, do you know that are, that have a criminal record?
I'd have to say at least 50%. Right now we have about 110 employees. So say 50 to 60%.
Well, I want to thank Jamie McDonald, again, co-owner of Bear's Smokehouse Barbecue in Connecticut. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much for having me on.
Our show is produced by Lydia Brown and Jeff Tyson. Our technical producer is Kyone Wolf. WNPR's digital editor is Heather Brandon. Executive producer is Katie Tolarski. As always, you can continue this conversation on our website, WNPR.org/where we live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.